So our next step is to analyze our activities, both the list activity and the form activity, to understand how and when we should save all the students into the memory, somewhere in a database. Let's take a look. First, we start our application with the list activity, which loads an array of students. And doesn't seem to make much sense here. An array of students? Well, Guilherme, Paulo, Ana, Maria Lúcia, Carlos, and Daniela, by default, no, it should start with an empty database, with an empty set of students. So we know that the students here should be loaded actually from the database. So this is something that we need to do. Load the students from the database. That's something that we need to do. So that's it. And we need to load the students. Of course, we are not loading just the name. We load the object itself, the student himself. That's something that we need to do. In the form activity, what do we need to do? Well, when we save the students, we need to save this student into the database. So here, before we make the toast, we need to save the student into the database. So whenever we go back to the student list, it reloads the database and shows the student to us. So let's do those two steps. So first, let's start by saving the student. How do I save a student? Well, I need a database. And if I need a database, I need to write the code to create this database. Fortunately, Android already comes with some helpers, that allow us to open connections to the database, to the local database, and to save data there, to create tables, to delete, to look for information, everything using, by default, SQL. So that's what we are going to do. We are going to create our own object, which is a helper related to SQLite, a SQL database that comes with Android. So what we're going to create is create a new class, and the class is going to be called, it's the object that accesses the data in the database related to all our students. So what we call it, it's the student data access object. So we just abbreviate it and use the DAO. The student DAO is the class which objects are going to be responsible for saving the data, loading the data, creating the database, dropping the database, doing whatever you want with the database related to the students. So I'm going to create a student DAO class. This class here, it must inherit from SQLite, everything together with just one L, open helper. So this is the helper that helps us creating the database, connecting to the database, and doing stuff with the database. That's what we want. And it complains. It complains because we need to implement two methods. We need to implement those two methods, and it's mandatory. So let's hit alt return, implement the methods. So it shows, oh, you need to implement the method onCreate, onUpgrade. Please do it for me. So it creates those two methods. So what do I need to do on the onCreate methods? The onCreate method means that the first time we load the application with this SQLite Open Helper, it's going to create the database for us the first time we run the application with a database. So we want to create the table. That's true. We need to create a table that represents all the fields on the students table. So let's do this. So how do we do that? We create a SQL string, and the string itself is create, let me make it clear, table, students. So uppercase are the keywords from SQL, the other words, the lowercase, are the ones I'm choosing. So the fields that I'm going to add on the students table are the name, which is a text, and it's not new. I'm gonna add the address, which is also a text, the website, which is also a text, the email, which is also a text, the phone number, which is also a text, and finally the grading. For the grading, I need to choose some specific format that represents decimal numbers. So in my case, I'm gonna choose a real value. Semicolon, and then, so this is the SQL code that I want to execute, the one that creates the table students. So did I write everything okay? Yes. And then I want to execute this code. So I tell database, please execute this SQL code. That's the code that I want to execute. And I'm happy, and it should execute this code whenever the database is going to be created for the first time. Whenever this code is going to be run from the first time, this student DAO. But take a look here. When I'm creating a students table, I'm creating with all the fields that we have in the form, but it's missing an identity key. Every student and most tables in a database, most entities will have its own identifier, an ID, which is usually an integer, and it auto-increments itself like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's an integer which is a primary key to our table, and it auto-increments itself. So I'm gonna add this field also, the ID, which is an integer, which is a primary key. Then the name and then the other fields. So that means that whenever we have a student, so I'm gonna look for the student class, I'll also have the student ID, which in my case, it's going to be an ID, an integer, an int. So that's it. So I'm just keeping the field here. I'm not setting the field so far. We'll see when we need to use it. But so far we'll store this information also in the database so we can talk about students. Oh, the student 15, the registry number 13, the line 15, the line 17, the student 18, and so on. We have the ID to identify each line in our database. So that's the ID integer primary key. That's the basic SQL code to generate the table, but it's still complaining about something. So we implemented the create, which creates the table. We could implement the onUpgrade, which would run whenever there's a changing version of the version that I'm currently installing and the previous version that is installed in my client's database. So if I'm upgrading my application, I release a new version of my application. For example, I release the version 5 and my client's running the version 4. So I need to run some updates. Maybe yes, maybe not. So here I can check the old version and the current version. So if there's some changes that I want to apply, I can apply the same way we apply it here. Just db, exec, SQL, and write the SQL that you want. So I can use the onUpgrade to upgrade the version from the old database to the new one. So I can add new fields, change fields, do whatever I need. I can evolve my database. We are not doing anything, we are creating the table and that's it, so we are happy with an empty onUpgrade method. But here, the student DAO is still complaining, and it's complaining that there's no default constructor available in SQLite Open Helper. And we need to add a constructor. So if we hit Alt Return, it shows that there is create constructor matching super, and there should be 2 constructors that we can choose from. The first one, which receives only 4 arguments, and the second one, which receives 5 arguments. We are choosing the first one, the one with 4 arguments. So what is it receiving here? It's receiving the context as usual. The activity is going to be passed so that the super, or father class or mother class knows how to deal with everything. It has a reference to whatever it needs. We need to say the database name. But the database name we're not receiving as an argument. It's something fixed in our application. Of course, it's our application. We know the name. I know the name that I'm going to give to my database. The name that I'm going to use for my database is the student contact. Student contact is the name of the database that I'm going to use. Then you receive the factory here. No, the factory is something that you might want to use to configure some more advanced optional arguments. We are not going to use any factory, so to some optional things. So I'm just passing new here. So I don't need these arguments here. So just new. And the version, who knows the version? I know the version. So I'm not receiving the version as an argument. I'm just telling the version, the current version is version 1. I'm just naming the version of my database structure. So whenever I release a new version which requires a database change, then I can change this version here. This is the version, the current version that I have. If you want, you can check here if the old version is the same as the new one or not, and upgrade accordingly. In our case, we are releasing the first version of the database, and this first version is going to create the tables on the onCreate. And that's it. That's all we have. So that's how we implement the DAO here. So the first version, it's going to create a table with all this information, and it's not going to do anything if the old version is something else, because it's the first version, it's the first release, so I'm fine with it. It's the first of all it's going to create, and I'm happy with the results of creating this database. So let's go back to the form activity and try to save a student into the database. How do I save a student into the database? So to save the student into the database, I'll need to get a student DAO in my hands. So I'll try to get a student DAO in my hands, student DAO. It requires a context, which is our own activity, which is this, myself, I'm the activity, which is the context. So this is my DAO, right? So I'll call it DAO. And then with my DAO in my hands, with a reference to my DAO, with my data access object, what I want to do is, I want to save this student here. I want to save it. So I'm gonna say, DAO, please save this student. Okay, so it's common to find the method named save or insert. I prefer insert because it's explicit what it's doing. It's inserting a new student into the database. It's not updating. Save has so many meanings. It might mean insert, it might mean update. So because it has so many meanings, I prefer to go and stick with insert. So let's create this method. I'm hitting Alt return, create method. So here's my insert method, and here I need to insert the student into the database. But if we go back to the student form activity, that's it. It just saves the student into the database. Should I keep this comment because it's not clear what's it doing here? Well, if you take a look, if I put it in one line, it's common. You'll find that several people doing something like this. New student DAO this dot insert student, and that's it. You'll find a lot of people doing something like this. It's plausible. It's something you can do. I will stick to the 2 lines, and we will see why. Because after inserting the student, just right after I inserted the student into the database, I want to close my connection. And to close my connection, I'll ask the database to close, or I'll ask the data access object to close the connection with the database. And notice that the close method already exists. So it already exists, and it's going to invoke the method which is defined in my parent class, and it closes the connection, and it's done, and everyone is happy and live happy forever, and that's it. So all we need to do is implement the insert method. So let's implement the insert method. We go to the insert method, and we try to, well, how do I insert the database, something into the database? Because here on the onCreate and the onUpgrade, I have the SQLite database, so I can do something here with the database, because it's a writable it's a database where we can execute things. So it's something that we can write to. So we need this guy, otherwise we can't insert anything. So I'm gonna ask for a writable database, get writable database. The get writable database, if I hit Alt return, returns to me a local variable, can be a local variable, which I'm going to call database. And this database is a writable database. So I can insert database.insert into the table students something. So what am I going to insert into this table? I'm going to insert this student here. But actually the insert method receives 2 arguments. The first argument is the one that deals with null values. We don't want to do anything with null values, so we're just passing null as the second argument. And the third argument is the data itself. It's what you want to save. Okay, I want to save this student. And then you might think, okay, I'm happy with this, I'm pretty happy, everybody's happy, but actually the insert method doesn't receive a student. The insert method, if you take a look at it, it receives the string table, the string new column hack, and it receives the content values. So I need to create something which is called a content values, which works pretty much as a hash map from Java or a dictionary from many other languages. So this is the data that I want to save, and I can create this local variable here, content values. And this data I can just say, okay, please put into the name field of my table, into the name column of my students table, put the student get name, put the name of the student there. Please put the name of the student there, and it puts the name of the student there. So the data object is just a set of objects, for example, the name, and then I have the grading. Let me just check here, grading, which is the student get grading. So now I have those 2 fields, and I'm trying to set those 2 columns to those 2 values, and then I can save here this data, and then I'm saving the data. So in order to insert some data into the database, I can either run a SQL line, so I could write here something like database dot exec SQL. But if I do so, I have to take care here of SQL injection. I don't want to pay attention to SQL injection. I don't want to care about security issues because of SQL injection. It's one of the top security issues in the world. So in order to not think about it and be sure that it's working securely, I'm not going to use exec SQL. If I use exec SQL with values that a student provided, then I open the door for SQL injection. I don't want to open the door for SQL injection, so I'm going to use the API that checks for SQL injection and doesn't allow it for me. So using this kind of API, the insert API, it will generate the insert SQL command, the SQL query, the statement, but it will parse the data that the student provided me, not to allow SQL injection. So it's not allowing SQL injection, and it's inserting the student into the database. If I did the database dot exec SQL insert into students values, and then came the values here, then the name of the columns, for example, ID, name, and grading, or just name and grading as we are doing so far. Just name and grading. Here I would have to concatenate the strings. So here it would be student get name. This would be between single commas and then single quotes, sorry. And then I would add a comma and then single quote, and then quote plus students get rating, and then I did it wrong because there shouldn't be any quotes here. So I'm removing the quotes and the single ones here, and then I'm praying that it should work. So you get grading, not rating, grading, get grading. Grading, sorry. So I hope this is the query that I should write. Notes that I concatenate things and quotes and single quotes, and no, I shouldn't concatenate single quote. First, it's painful. Second, if the end user types his name as he will drop my table. Because if his name is something like that, or something similar to that, it will concatenate this thing here into my query, execute something like inserting the values. I should fix it to insert two values, and then drop the table. No, I don't want this. I don't want to open the door to SQL injection, to SQL injection. So if I do something like that, I have to take care of escaping codes, of escaping information from my end users. And the chances here is that I'm not going to remember at some point, and I'm not going to do the best work at escaping things at some point, because it's life, we just forget things at some point. And then someone is going to take advantage of that and exploit our SQL injection bug here. So instead of doing that, I'll just ask, please create the insert queries, the insert statement for me, do all the escaping you need to do. I'm inserting into students, the name of the field is name, that's the value, the name of the field is grading, that's the value. Good luck, just try to insert, and I don't care what you're going to do, just do it for me. That's what I'm saying here, and that's what I want to do. So that's good enough for me. So I'll just save this thing here, just saving the inserts, and this will insert the data into the database. That's good. So we can try and run our application. I'll try to hit stop, sorry. I'll try to go to the emulator and close the application. And then I'll try to build the application again. So I'll rebuild the project. And I'll run the application. It's running the application. I'll click add, and then I'll add my name to it. And remember that I'm Guilherme, I'll add Turini, of course, because Guilherme is already there. So Rodrigo Turini, and I'll choose 4 out of 5 stars, and I'll click add, confirm. Rodrigo Turini was created with grading 4, and it's not in my list. Come on, where is he? So why is he not here? Of course, we did all the code that should write to the database. But if we go back to the student list activity, we didn't do anything to load the data from the database, and that's what we are doing next.